Breitling acquires Universal Genève, Colloquium puts the Special K back into watches, Accutron are seeing red, and we do our last final trip of 2023. Welcome to the Scottish Watches podcast. We have a ton to go through today. We've been on our travels. Dave has been in Switzerland, but not for the usual reasons. Not because he is at Raj HQ, where he spends most of his time, but we were doing our little factory tours, our factory visits, things that were added just at the final point of the year, and we ended on an absolute high.
Absolutely. We were, quite literally, in Switzerland doing Swiss things with a multitude of brands. Well, two, should we say, not so much a multitude, those being IWC and a sneaky little trip that kind of was in the offing for a good few months with Moser. And more about those two trips later, because lots certainly went down. And it was the ending of a 3-week period I had spent in Switzerland. But since we come back, there's some big news. Breitling have got a new baby brand.
There's some even bigger news, Dave, and that is that everyone should check the show notes. You should click the link in our podcast player or the YouTube video description. It'll take you to our website, to a specific page that will be inundated with all the correct spelling of everything that you want to know about, thanks to Ms. L. Isn't that right?
That will absolutely not be the case. I mean, on the basis that I can generally spell, you're reasonably good as long as you're not typing too fast, and Ms. L is just not good at spelling. So therefore, the chances are pretty slim.
If you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to like the video, drop us a comment when you're finished, and subscribe to the channel so you can check out new things and click the notification bell, because most people don't find out when new videos appear and then they're a week out of date. And by that time, all the limited edition watches we speak about are gone, including our own one. But anyway, we should probably talk about the latest breaking news, and that is from the Breitling folks. We had Gerald Genta's wife and daughter on the show a number of times, episode 300 and episode 355, and we had a fantastic time speaking to them about all types of Gerald Genta stuff. But on one of the shows, the first one, we actually managed to find out from his wife, Evelyn, that she was looking for a pole router that Universal Genève had put together. And it turned out we managed to facilitate that, and a listener travelling all the way from Ireland to London to meet her, to give her one of those watches. But back then we actually discussed on the show the fact that, why is this brand sitting in the doldrums? Why is nobody speaking about them? Every other brand has been brought back to life. What's the story here? And it turns out some people had been sitting on it for a number of years. So Dave, tell us all about it.
So, the big bit, as you've noticed, Breitling have a new sibling, that being Universal Genève, and it comes as nothing as a surprise, but potentially altogether a surprise, depending on how you look at these things. Is it a surprise that someone has finally picked up Universal Genève, that being someone in Switzerland, to maybe try and bring it back to the mainstream? I don't think that's a big surprise. I think the fact Breitling have done it maybe comes a little bit out of left field.
Well, I'll jump in and ask you, Dave. You know more about this than I do. Does Breitling have sister brands? Moser have got Hot Launce. Obviously, we were across there speaking to them, hence the top. Tudor, Rolex. There's all these little mini brands, sub-brands. Has Breitling done this before?
Breitling is a strange one, because as we look at Breitling today, it's a very different beast to what it's been historically. Obviously, it has had a few changes of ownership and structure over the last number of years and number of decades. So as much as the brand has a lot of heritage and history, many models that many people will be very well aware of, Navitimer being probably one of the most famous, it's fair to say that it has had a bit of turmoil of its own. Most of the brands we talk about that have kind of siblings, Rolex with Tudor, for example, are much more kind of secure brands that have maybe had something built out of them. I think for me, Breitling having this probably plays very much to the whole narrative that Kern is trying to build Breitling into a bit of a mini group, potentially with the idea to float this little endeavour onto the public stock markets and make some money in the process. Fair play to him if he does. But I think this, for me, Universal Genève is such a historical brand, but it really has done very little since really the 1970s, 1980s. It's been in the ownership of a Hong Kong-based group for many years. There's been multiple times they've tried to kind of get it back into the mainstream, and it's never really taken hold. I'm intrigued to see what they do with this. I've got a good idea what they're going to do with it. It's going to become a premium top-end brand sitting above Breitling. I don't know personally whether I agree with that course of action. I always see Universal Genève as something of a bit of the past. It did some really cool things back in the day, but it's been so quiet for so long. Are they going to homage some stuff from their past, or are they just going to do very premium new versions of what they did in the past? That remains to be seen. But I think from now, within the next 3 to 5 years, I think that whole Breitling group that is now including University of Genève is going to suddenly be a bit more worth than it is now. So we'll see. But who knows? Because George Kern is a man with a plan, but he's not shared that with us yet.
No, he hasn't. And we've had him on the show this year. We have spoken with one of his lead designers, if not top designers, recently. So maybe we'll ask a couple of questions and see if we can find out a little bit more about it. I didn't know that they were looking to position this as the high version, like the LUC of Chopard or the Minerva of Montblanc. I thought it would have come in as a Tudor, as a more classically styled, simplistic design, maybe going back to the Sector, dials of the past, something like that. But it's cool to see another brand that has been revived, and it has been sitting there for, 33 years, doing practically nothing with this holding company. Apparently they tried to get rid of it a few times, nobody was really biting. But we said it on the show, we had a discussion saying, is it about time? Are they the next one that's going to come along? Because everybody's dealing with Genta in the last couple of years, and that is one of the remaining brands that hasn't really jumped at it.
I think this is going to go quiet for a while, and it'll be a few years before we really see what his grand plan is.
Interesting to find out what's going to go on there. But something that's been happening in New York is there has been a family affair happening, and that is a brand that I'd never heard of before. They got in touch with us a couple of months ago, but we've had such a stock sitting to go through of different watches, different models, different colorways. It's taken a long time to actually get to today, but we did promise we would try and get there before the end of 2023, and here we are today talking about a watch from the brand Knopf. So the first thing that I noticed was it's a pretty cool little box with lots of accoutrements inside. You have got a cloth to keep things nice and shiny, always a welcome addition when you have got a polished bracelet with polished centre links. Now this watch caught my eye when they emailed across because it has got a sort of mosaic marquetry style design, very much inspired from the Art Deco era of almost 100 years ago, and taken inspiration from a lot of the New York City skyline. Another thing that I spotted that I recently mentioned about the only other watch I have seen this on, it has got an extremely thin outer bezel, and it has got a split between the Romans and the Arabics as it goes around the circumference. And one of the favourite things I've got about this one is the fact, like a lot of watches we've spoken about this year on the show, it features the STP 111 movement, but you can actually see the bloody thing in this watch. Most of the time, when you get STP movements inside, you can see bugger all. It is totally hidden away inside under a case back, but this time you have got a nicely decorated rotor, decorated movement, you've got blued screws, and it's just pretty cool to actually see the inner workings of this thing instead of your usual Salita or NH35. The bracelet it comes on is very oyster-esque. Got to be careful with the terminology because you know how the folks over at Geneva like to get litigious. And it features a clasp that again reminds me of a certain superhero that has a sidekick. Good looking watch, really well put together. I love the way that the dial just dances around with all that different colour and all those little mosaic inserts. So if this is something you like the look of, then jump on because they have got an end of year sale at the moment. And this is available, as I said, with the automatic Swiss-made STP 1-11 inside for 780 quid. Comes with that presentation box, tons of links, and you've got a range of different colours that you can pick this up in as well. Dave, you've had a quick look at this. What are your impressions of that dial?
The dial's pretty interesting. 5 layers, I believe. So this is really their little piece of DNA, what they talk about. The dial is made up of many of these parts that are all done by hand, and it gives this kind of effect. It's a sunburst effect dial, but with these different layers on it. For this, some folk are definitely going to be all over it because they're going to love that effect that the dial has, especially the way it plays with the lights. And if it has got a little deal on it just now and you like it, then maybe now's the time to buy.
So if you want to find out more about this watch, definitely check out the show notes. There'll be links, full spec there. 41, well, I'll tell you just now, it's a 41mm watch. Wears quite heavy because of that, and obviously the bracelet that is super solid. It's not like 5-link, it's not mesh, it is a really sturdy affair. Different colourways available on the website. There'll be loads of pictures in the show notes, so if you like it, grab a hold of it before they sell out. Now Dave, What shall we talk about next?
What could we talk about? Maybe something with some legacy? Maybe a limited edition as well?
Okay, we're going to talk about a watch Dave owns. I don't own this one. I was going to buy it, but then I didn't. What do you mean, well? What does well mean?
Well, David owns a variant of this watch, but not this watch. This is not the watch you're looking for.
Dave owns the original, the OG green version of this, and I think there was actually a red bar version at some point as well.
Indeed, so this watch we're talking about is the limited edition Accutron DNA Casino watch. Now that's a mouthful. Accutron obviously launched a couple of years ago now, I believe around about 2018, 2019, something around there, where the big relaunch happened, where Citizen, the owner company of Accutron these days, has relaunched Accutron as a standalone brand. And they worked for around 10 years on the electrostatic movement that features heavily in the Accutron range, and in fact in the DNA, all of them have this electrostatic movement in them.
And you charge that up not using the winding crown, but you have to take a balloon and rub it on your hairy parts.
So you will struggle to keep this watch charged, I would suggest. What did they do? They launched two models. They launched a more classic version. It has lugs on it. It looks like a big version of a classic Accutron, featuring this electrostatic movement. This is the one that I have in the original green colourway. Then they also, at the same time, launched what they called their DNA, which was a more modern, futuristic case. Lugless in the respect of the strap fits directly onto the case, so it doesn't have lugs in the traditional sense, albeit I guess effectively there are still lugs there, albeit hidden inside the case. It gives a much more kind of fluid, more futuristic UFO type look to it, and that's what we're talking about here. There's a new variant, a family of a few different colours called the Casino series. Now, what they've done here is they have incorporated some punchy colours. Those punchy colours being emerald green, topaz orange, sapphire blue, and ruby red. Check out the show notes if you want to see how punchy, in fact, these colours actually are. The case on it is stainless steel, but it's been treated with a kind of dark grey anthracite kind of CVD, PVD type coating on there as well, which gives it this darker kind of case look around these brighter colours. That really, again, helps to further lift the brightness and punchiness of these colours and this electrostatic movement. Now, we can talk about that, and I certainly can because I own one. You're right, you don't wind it up in the traditional way. It uses a small electrostatic motor that generates power that charges up a capacitor. The capacitor holds on to that power and releases it to power the watch. There is a separate motor to run the second hand. Now it is quite power hungry because obviously a second hand is moving continuously as it travels around the watch once every minute. And if the watch detects that it's not moving so much, it parks it at 12, bang on, after 5 minutes of inactivity. That saves quite a lot of power. It only then requires the power to move the minute hand and the hour hand. If you pull the crown, the whole thing comes to a little bit of a sleep state as well, so it reserves the power. Now, the charge, if it's fully charged, should last around 10 years. So as long as you're wearing the watch reasonably frequently, moving it around, keeping it active and moving and jiggy, then you've got 10 years of power reserve on this as well. I haven't been there, and I don't know of anyone that has. I would recommend probably not letting it become fully discharged, because if, like maybe some older Seiko models that also use the capacitor, once they're dead, it takes a trip back to Japan to have some surgery. Probably not going to be fun or inexpensive, but make sure you just use it every month or so, and I think you should be absolutely fine. Aesthetically, these, I quite like them. I definitely prefer the more classic one, hence why I bought it, but I think for the DNA range, these are really good. I am surprised in many respects. I wasn't sure whether this whole project would actually have legs and would last. It has. We're now in year 4 or 5 of the journey of Accutron coming back to life, and it just seems to be going from strength to strength. Ricky mentioned we did a red bar edition with them a mere 6 months ago, and they've done many other colour iterations and collaborations over the last few years as well. So it's looking like they've definitely got a little bit of a foothold and they're moving forward. It's great to see. Definitely a very different moving technology. I think Ricky probably likes this, but I think he probably doesn't like the fact they're so big, because he has one of the originals and it's infinitely smaller than this is.
I was gutted when they actually released the for sale version of this. They hyped it up beforehand. They talked about reviving it because, as you say, it used to be Boulevard. Accutron was the model range. Citizen owns Boulevard, but then they split Boulevard and Accutron separately. It was a bit of a mess, but I liked the look of the designs. And then when it came out, it didn't hold a light to the original one, the Space View, the 214 that I've got. I just didn't like it compared to it. It didn't have the coils, it didn't have the tuning fork. Yes, it had a different system versus Quartz, but it was a different system. It would have been like putting a silicon oscillator in there. It was just a completely new idea. And they tried to make it kind of look the same, but it lost the symmetry. So I wasn't interested. And whenever I saw even your one, even the ones that I did videos of, I just loved it and preferred the original one. Plus, it's something very much of a nostalgia kick for me. Having seen it on TV, Tim Hunkin's show, The Secret Life of Machines, that's forever ingrained in my memory, childhood memories, and I love that show till the day I die. So this was almost like an imposter, but taken the new version, where they've changed the colour, they've got the different strap arrangement like you mentioned. Now it's a different watch. Now it's something cool. Now it's something unique and hip and happening. It's a bit like the Mad 1. I loved the Mad 1 blue. The Mad 1 red was the one I could get a hold of, and I'm either blue or red. Not a mixture of the both like I'm wearing today on my top. And with this one, it's a departure from the original. It completely separates it, so I don't mind the size. I just mentioned the Mad 1 Red. That's one of the most bulbous things you can put in your wrist, apart from a trilobe, and I have got a trilobe in to look at just now, and holy shit, it's amazing. But this one, potentially yes. Potentially yes. If I was thinking of buying a watch, which I am not at the moment, I could definitely see myself going for this, and because it's a red colour, and you don't really see many red watches, people tend to stay away from it. You made a comment in one of the most recent shows about Neil Duckworth bringing out a square watch, and the trade was always in the notion of you will not sell a square watch, it has to be circular. Well, red watches seem to not be flavour of the month, but maybe they could be.
No, absolutely, you're right. Square watches are definitely not in the more common end, as we have mentioned before. But it seems like lots of brands are getting in the square game. Lots and lots of them, in fact, over the last maybe year, 2 years.
Okay, pop quiz, Dave. What watches over the past 3 to 5 years that are square have you bought? Or if you haven't bought that many, have you liked and thought about buying?
I quite like the Nomos Tetra. I liked its only swatch. In fact, I liked a couple of them. A couple of the colours I wasn't so keen on, but I liked a couple of them. Obviously, GLC, plenty of reversos that I've really taken a fancy to in the last, well, actually more than 2 years. There's been a couple of little square rados, or rados, whatever we want to call them this week, that I have always quite liked. They do some funky little collabs, so I've quite liked them. And there is something else, obviously the Duckworth, must say the Duckworth, because we need to keep Neil happy, It is a cool watch, though, I have to be said. Not my aesthetic with the kind of vintage thing. Nick, obviously at Fears, I was very close to buying one of those heritage pieces that he did. I think it was the small seconds one. So there was that, and there's definitely, G-Shock. We can't forget square G-Shocks. So I think that's a fair number of square watches, do you not?
Yeah, that's not bad actually, and you have got a couple of those, I do know, and the archival series from Fears were really cool when they came out. Then there was the new Tanks, then there was the new Santos and all the rest of it. I think probably one of my favourite square watches from the last year was the Sega Designs X-Skeleton that came in. And we actually did a video on that. If you haven't been on our YouTube channel recently, or you haven't checked our Instagram, we've been doing a thing during December called the Scottish Watches Advent Calibre. Each day we take a watch that's been sent in for long-term review, and we have showcased it on the show. 60 seconds or less, showing you a new watch every day, and the Sega design was a particular favourite that I made sure was included, because for about $300, probably cheaper at this point of time because Amazon are always running discounts and deals, you get a fantastic skeletonized movement with a shock absorber system, titanium, carbon, it's got a silicon strap, it has got a customised rotor and movement inside, fully automatic, and it's insane for like 300 quid. So that's probably my favourite square watch of the moment. But anyway, that was a good sidetrack of mine. Let's get back onto the main line and talk more about this. What's the price point? Is it limited? Is it available just now?
It is limited. There are 4 colours, as we mentioned. Each of those colours, there are 100 of each available. So relatively limited edition, I would say. $3,500 US is the price point for each of these watches. The movement as well, it has to be said, really nice in terms of accuracy, running at slightly strange numbers, +5, -5, which is where they're pitching it. So Not the same standard as Kosk, but +5 -5 is pretty respectable, it has to be said. And of course, it's definitely proprietary, stroke, in-house, whatever you want to call it, but it's something that's definitely unique. If you like these, check out the small number of Accutron dealers worldwide, a few in Europe, a few in the UK, and a few in the United States, because they probably will not hang around for long.
In full agreement, you like it, go grab it. The amount of people in the last week that have been in touch to say they missed out on Braveheart when we had that out 2-3 weeks ago, or missed out on other limited edition watches where they went to sleep, woke up the next day and things were gone. See, if you like something and you can afford it and it's not going to break the bank and you're going to regret it afterwards if you don't, jump at it, because the amount of unhappy folks in the last couple of weeks has been insane. But a company I've never heard of should be very happy because we're about to talk about them. And this is one that you put forward, Dave. I can't even pronounce them properly.
This is a watch that I really very much like. This is a brand called Colloquium, and their watch is called the Project 01. Now, there's lots of Ks going on here. Colloquium has 2 in it. Project is spelled the funky way with a K before the T at the end. And it is a interesting, what will we say? It's a concept brand rather than a concept watch. So 3 people have got themselves together and they have created Colloquium. Who do we have? We have Emmanuel Emich. Now, he is a veteran manager of the watch trade, been in charge with Louis Erard, Raqueta, also having worked for Jackie Drew, RJ Romain Jerome in the past as well. So someone who has been in and around the watch industry for many years with many brands. We have Barth Nussbaumer, who is a designer who's got a really wide, far-reaching kind of portfolio of designs, worked for Tag Heuer and various other brands along the way. And finally, we have Amar Sindhi, who is an influencer and social media consultant who is known as the Horophile on the social media channels. That's the 3 guys that I've got together. The idea being of the brand that it's something that they can do outlandish things that don't take themselves too seriously, that they themselves have kind of always wanted to do, but are very unlikely to be picked up, shall we say, by the mainstream brands because they're a wee bit garish and out there. The first thing they've done, and it really is noticeable on this one, is the case. Unlike pretty much everything else in the watch trade that's got a metal case in it, it's not a machined case. It is a die-cast case. Now, die casting is used significantly in engineering with metals, but it's not used so much in watches. Why, may you ask? Because as a general rule, it doesn't produce a particularly well-finished and refined case. Then you've got the dial, and I don't even know where to begin.
Oh, Dave,
Yes,
can I jump in?
you can jump in.
Try and describe the dial?
Go on.
Can I try?
You can try. Let's go
Okay,
with
here we go,
Ricky's
here we go.
description of the dial. Also check the show notes out, everyone.
That's in case I f*** this up. So, my interpretation of what the dial looks like is the really shitty gadget shop toy that you would get as a kid maybe 20 years ago that had lots of pins, quite long pins, and you would put your hand on it and you'd push the pins and it would make an impression in the pins of whatever it was, your hand or other body parts. And usually you'd find them in shops with an array of different finger arrangements because kids like me and Dave had been in previously. Am I right?
Do you know, it is literally the one thing that I was thinking would maybe do a justification to the dial in terms of trying to describe it. But then I also thought there are probably lots of people listening to this that are too young to remember that toy. I think it was pretty in fashion when I was maybe in my teens, but I can't even remember seeing one in a shop in many, many years. But yes, Ricky, that is a pretty good analogy.
Menkind, your high street shopping centre, has it still for about 20 quid.
Well, there you go. I didn't even know Menkind as a brand even existed on the high street anymore, so that shows you something. But yes, you have an interesting dial, lots of little hand-applied cylinders. Each of those cylinders is topped with a little bit of superluminova. I believe there's 468 of these cylinders that have been hand-applied to the dial. You don't have any bezel. You've really got what can only be described as a box sapphire crystal that then kind of goes up and over all of these. I think the dial looks absolutely amazing. I think it's a fantastic piece of work. And to be honest, if these were available, I would be all over this. This is absolutely my type of work.
What's this, Dave?
Yeah, I can see you can still buy it for, you were wrong though, £13, Ricky, £13. If you're watching this on YouTube, you will see exactly what we're talking about now. If you're not and you're listening to this in your ears, check out the show notes to see Ricky deciding to try and prove a point in the middle of a recording. But hey, we'll go with it. I even agreed with him and he still had to prove the point. But I will say it wasn't £20, Ricky, it was 13 of your finest pounds.
£20 back in the day, it's now discounted due to cheap labour.
Was it discounted? Even with inflation, it's gone down the way. That's quite impressive.
It's like quartz watches, they were about £2,500 back in the 70s. Now, £2.50.
This is also fair. Now, the only sad thing about this watch is it's completely sold out. So don't go trying to buy it because this is the Family and Friends edition, or Friends and Family edition if I get it the right way around. The cost on this was very surprising, €2,666.66, which is a very strong price point for the kind of materials and craft and different points of design that are in this watch. They do promise there will be more versions of it made available, not in the Family and Friends category, and they promise similar price points as well. I just think this is super cool. I love seeing things that are a little bit different like this. It's very much in the same vein, I think, as Mad 1. Funky, out there, weird and wonderful at a relatively accessible price point. And this is the best bit about watches, is when folk can come up with stuff like this. Good specs under the hood as well. This has a La Joux-Perret G101 movement on there as well. So all in all, a cast steel case, decent La Joux-Perret movement, really funky dial, boxed crystal, under €3,000. I don't think there's a whole lot to argue about here.
It's stunning. And it is exactly as you say, it's a watch design that's art. It's a different way of showing things. I've never seen this before. I don't have all the knowledge in the world. I constantly say that. It could have come out in the past, but I've never seen anything like it. And it's one of those things when you look at it, you think, why did nobody think of this before? It is just such a cool way of doing it. And it reminds me putting on my old school computer hat back in the day, back in the demo scene of the 90s with the Amiga and the PC, Future Crew, Triton. They would do all these spinning graphic things and it looked like Braille that would come to life and display graphics. This is exactly how some of these dials look.
Good job, guys. This is an absolute banger.
And something else that was an absolute banger was our end-of-year trip across to almost Germany. It was the Swiss-German border, it was Schaffhausen, and there are a couple of brands out there you may have heard of. We've been teasing it for years. We've been talking to the guys at IWC about doing a factory visit since COVID times. I remember it was September 2021. We went down south to Goodwood to one of their events where David Coulthard was there, and we got to interview him because he was a brand ambassador and spokesperson for the brand IWC. That happened. Then we have had events in Scotland. They have come along. They've done our container events just outside Edinburgh Castle. We've had Red Bar events with them. We even got a little sneaky peek of the Ingenieur earlier this year when it got launched at Watches and Wonders. And we've been trying to get something arranged. But finally, we managed to get across.
We've been planning this for a considerable period of time and it never quite kind of came to a head in terms of having the content and the idea to go. But Theo, one of the guys that we've dealt with at IWC for many years, reached out and said, I've got a plan. And a plan indeed he did have. So this involved us travelling out to Zurich. He suggested it was better to stay in the big city than it was to stay in the small town of Schaffhausen. And I think he was right on that side of things. We got there though, and we had a few people accompanying us. Adrian from Bark and Jack was also out, and a few other people of note, but we'll get more on that later. We then spent the evening having a lovely dinner and a few drinks, altogether probably a few too many drinks, but that involved taking some painkillers and a lot of water before bed, because the next day we were up relatively early to get ourselves an hour-ish down the road to Schaffhausen, and we began the day by having a look around the IWC Museum, which itself is located in the original building that IWC occupied when they made their move from the United States to Europe and to, in fact, Schaffhausen. Interesting little fact that we learnt from our driver as he was taking us to the venue and to the manufacturer is that this is the only town in Switzerland on that side of the river. In fact, everywhere else on that side of the river is Germany, which did lead to a few little minor international travel incidents later on in the trip.
We'll keep that one for later on because that does play a part in the story a couple of times and it got a little bit hairy at one point. Yeah, that was interesting. We'll get to that. But we travelled across. When I say we, I mean the royal we. I did. Dave was already in Switzerland, but I met up with Adrian in Edinburgh Airport. He was there with his new video guy, who was along for his first watch trip. So we kind of found our feet, found our bearings, got across there, and as you say, day one of the trip, we ended up at the old building where they've got the museum, but they've also got far more than that. They have got drawings, schematics, going way, way back. They've got original manuscripts from back in the day. We're talking hundreds of years old, plus all the tools that were used by the original watchmakers, who were, as we found out slightly later on, bored farmers that had nothing better to do in the winter than create amazing mystery marvels and wristwatches, pocket watches, clocks, all kinds of stuff like that. And we were taken into a cinema room that looked unlike any cinema room I have ever seen. Check the show notes for this. And we got an education by our tour guide who explained the history of the brand, how the original gentleman, Mr. Jones, had come across from the States, had looked around to find the best place to launch a brand because watchmaking was massive in America and Switzerland was seen as the cheap place to get cheap labour. So we learned the history, we learned some of the high points, the low points, the takeovers, all the way from way back in the day, right the way through the 1800s, 1900s, 20th century, right up to present day.
So we got that little induction in that area, a little bit of film, a little bit looking around the museums, and then we were being whisked off to the all-new manufacture. And this is something that we have talked about in shows gone past when we've had Chris Granger, the CEO of the brand, on the show. Check out the show notes for links to the episodes where you can listen to him talk to us. But he has an architectural background, and his way into this brand had been, in fact, partly or helping to design the layout and the architecture of this all-new manufacture. And they were keen to tell us that it's still in Schaffhausen, albeit towards the outskirts, in a greenfield site, and we were driven out there a mere 5 or 10 minutes maximum from where we were out to the manufacture. And it has to be said, it is pretty impressive. A beautiful, big, modern factory where all of the things you would expect to be involved in manufacturing of watches integrated all in one building. And we got to have a look around. We were being dictated to rather specifically about what we could and couldn't take pictures of, which I guess is fair enough. When you get let behind the doors, they don't want the secrets running out with us. But we got to see everything. The manufacture of small parts, prototyping areas, even into the case making area. And we got to see things that we were even, as ourselves, surprised to see that IWC themselves are doing in-house in this factory, where I'm sure many brands may, let's say, not make some of the parts we saw being made themselves.
I'll jump in and say Dave knows a lot more about this because he now works with Orage, and they are the most open company in the world when it comes to watchmaking. They will literally show you what they do, because if you can manage to copy what they do and do it at the same price point, well done to you. But having that experience, and me, along with Adrian, having done a fair number of different factory tours across the world, you're usually chaperoned around, I don't know, it's like going to Disneyland and you're on a ride. It's on a conveyor system where you get to see the happy smiley faces at this point, but nothing beyond. And we really did get to see everything. There were the lines in the ground that said, follow this colour for such and such, but we were allowed to go and speak to the different workers, the different machinists, the different artists, because they had people there doing all kind of polishing work, running CNC 5-axis machines. There were folks working on the rotor decoration, and the best bit for me was seeing the raw materials. And this is where we found that they actually do so much in-house, in the house. They had rods and rods of different materials, different grades, grade 5 titanium, they had steel, all kinds of stuff. Just racks and racks of it. It was like going into a fabrication plant at one of the big automobile makers.
Yeah, absolutely. And this wasn't a put-on show for people or journalists getting showing around. We were literally in the main manufacturing areas, and whilst they had small offcuts that we were allowed to play with, behind that was racking of copious amounts of all the materials that you'll be used to seeing if you look at the IWC website or you visit any of their boutiques. Ceratanium, titanium, brass, stainless steel, all these materials were there and they were being fed into machines and parts were being spat out the other side. Lots of CNC machines, EDM, wire cutting, laser machines. And as we also moved through, there was the heavy industrial areas, but there was also the fine artisanal areas. You had the watchmakers in the super clean room environment areas doing T0, T1, T2.
You've mentioned this a couple of times, especially on the trip, T1, T2. For me, T2 is the favourite of all Terminator movies, but what does that actually mean?
Okay, so it's a terminage. So terminage 0, 1 and 2 and 3, etc. So these are different stages in watchmaking. T0 is the initial stage. This is a stage that, it has to be said, not so many brands do all of it or any of it in some cases. And that's where you're taking the individual components and any pieces that need to be permanently joined together, whether they are pinned, glued, pressed, etc. Any sub-assemblies that need parts put together that will stay put together is T0. Those assemblies, or the different T0 assemblies, when they're then put together into the greater movement, that is called T1, which is where you take these T0 sub-assemblies and you start to build them together. That's T1, and generally by the end of T1 you have fundamentally a complete movement, or a movement that will fit into a watch. T2 is the stage where all of those component parts, case, crystal, movement, dials, they're all assembled together and put into what most of us would recognise as a watch. So really, the T0 stage is the bit that if you see a watch brand doing their own T0, you know they're pretty good at it and you know that they are doing pretty much what you say or what you think they're doing, which is actually making a watch.
Well, we got to actually not make a real watch, but we actually got to actually play with some parts and muck about with them. This is something we actually did. This is something we do get to do on factory visits. We get to dick around with stuff, and it could be polishing, it could be machining, but they let us do all kinds of things. Unfortunately, we didn't get to do the best part because we were away recording 2 podcasts, not 1, but 2, and these are going to be fantastic. We got to speak to 2 of the gentlemen. One is one of the historians, the other is the guy that put together Serotonin. So they know what they're talking about, they have a bit of a clue. But while we were doing that, Adrian and the other special guest, who was a BBC presenter, artist, poet, former watchmaker, I think his name was Lionheart, he was along for the ride with us, and they got to do all the cool stuff about movements and moving wheels and bridges all around. We didn't get to do that, but people do get to do that. And the whole experience at IWC is a bit of a wrap up and bow for the end of the year. I thought it was really good. And we kind of finished up there, recorded the 2 shows, got our stuff together, and that was kind of the end of that, we thought. Then we were taken to what looked like a big massive meeting room, boardroom, and they laid out the selection box, and it wasn't a Christmas selection box. This was all the cool watches from IWC, recent history, modern day, some classics, and me and Dave got to go around and pick our favourites and try them on and get some pictures and record some video clips. So I probably should ask Dave, what were your favourites of the day? What ones did you get to play with? Because I had 2 of the Engineers out. I had the Big Pilot, white ceramic. I had the Mojave Desert, which reminds me of Karamak Sweets. Suspension watch that we spoke about a couple of years ago, and the turquoise one that has been doing the rounds and is a firm favourite of Lewis Hamilton. So what were your run through? What were your favourites on the day?
I had a good look at all the Pilot's watches. I love the Mojave, I love the white ceramic. These are really cool. But we've been super lucky and we've got to see and indeed handle many of these in the past. But there was a couple that we had yet to get our grubby mitts on due to either them being so rare in production, small numbers, or just the fact that they are probably too expensive to let us get our grubby mitts in it outside of a very secure room. I got to play with the XPL shock absorber. It's an amazing watch as a technical piece of engineering. A watch that you will be lucky if you see one in the wild. In fact, I think they said they make probably around 10 a year, so super small numbers. Not ludicrous money, albeit not cheap by any stretch. We eventually worked out that it was around 80,000 Swiss francs. So yes, definitely at the punchier end of the price spectrum, but still not out of the bounds of reality for some people. I also though got to play with the Portugueser minute repeater. What a watch. Absolutely outstanding. Beautiful sound coming off this watch as well. Again, minute repeaters, sonnery watches, not something by any stretch that you will see every day, but they were my two favourites for no other reason than one is super techy and that's kind of my thing, and the other is just something that is a beautiful thing to behold and to listen to and that you see very rarely in the wild. So they were my favourites.
I really liked seeing the museum pieces, and it reminded me of the trip I did just before COVID to JLC, exactly the same time of year back in 2019. And there is a weird feeling you get when you're in a place and it's your hobby, it's your passion, it's what you like. It's if you're into classic cars and you go to a museum where it is completely still and quiet, there are not lots of people coming because it's out of the way, it's not in a city centre location. And the people that are there for purpose. They're there because they love the watches or they work there, and you just get to absorb and think back in time to what it must have been like hundreds of years ago. As I say, being a farmer in the Swiss mountains and not having much to do apart from hone your craft and develop watches and movements and mechanisms. And I just like to cast my mind back when I was looking at all these things. So it was more the heritage pieces, plus some of the little ones from maybe 20, 30 years ago that I'd never seen before, been relatively new to the hobby. Seeing a watch from the 80s or the 90s or the early 2000s, that's new to me. And I got some fantastic pictures. Again, the two new cameras that I got just before Dubai, the Nikon ZF, plus the DJI Pocket Osmo 3, they were absolutely first class and stellar. And I think Adrian was quite taken with what I managed to get out of these baby cameras. And you guys will be able to see this in the show notes and in the YouTube video. But that is pretty much the end of that trip. The following day, we hung around. We decided to take a trip to see Moser because they'd been begging us to come out and see what they've been up to. And that's Moser, Hot Launce, Edward and the crew out there. But we don't have time in this episode to tell you all about it. So you just have to tune into the next episode where me and Dave will reveal all. And yeah, it was a pretty special trip for numerous reasons, and you'll find out all about that in the next show. So anything else, Dave, that we should probably talk about before we go?
The only thing I will tempt him with, as we did promise earlier on, was the joys of cross-border travel minus a passport.
So Dave says to me, we need to book a train ticket to get from where we are in Zurich across to Schaffhausen. Now, having travelled the day before, no problem at all, never got asked to take passports with us, using the online system to download the app, then buy the tickets, all the rest of it, seemed easy. So when we got on the train and we're travelling across and the conductor comes along, and I don't use public transport, last time I used a train must have been, God, over 10 years ago probably, to have the guy wander over, ask for tickets. I produce the QR code with a smile on my face because I'm Scottish and you're fucking lucky I bought a ticket. He scans it and then asks for ID, and I blankly look at him and think, why? I bought a ticket. You know what? It reminds me of when I went for my motorcycle test and I had an expired passport because I wasn't doing much travel at the time, and I produced it when they asked for photo ID and they said, that's expired. And my reply was, but it's still me. It was that kind of thing. I'd bought a ticket. They should have actually been quite happy that a Scotsman put his hand in his pocket and didn't chance his arse trying to get across without paying. But yeah, eventually after telling me I should have read the terms and conditions, who does that? I produced a Google Drive link with my passport. Dave did the same. It was a palaver. But we got to Moser and we got some nice tops and we got some other trinkets and good things. But we will tell you all about that in the next show. So check out the show notes. Be sure to subscribe to us wherever you listen to podcasts. If this is your first time, welcome. If you're a returning patron, greetings. Check out the YouTube channel. That's where all the videos are. That's where all the shorts are, the Advent Caliber clips. And there's going to be a lot more on there because Gav, our resident video editor, has been going through the back catalogue, all the interviews we've done over the past 6 months while we've been filming everything. He's working through all that and we're going to start drip feeding them onto the channel. So get subscribed, turn on the notification bell. And that's pretty much it. Check out the website, scottishwatches.co.uk. Drop us an email, info@scottishwatches.co.uk. Do not DM us. And also follow us on Instagram. That's where all the cool stuff happens instantaneously when we have got news to release. That is it. I think we have got a brand coming up on Thursday. It's a 2-horse race, Dave. It's a 2-horse race. We've got 2 episodes. It depends which one gets approved first as to what you're going to hear just before Christmas. And all that remains to be said is you guys hopefully have a fantastic festive period. Happy Christmas if that is what you celebrate. Happy whatever the else you celebrate if you celebrate that too. And we will catch you just before New Year. Anything you want to add?
Happy Christmas. Bah humbug.
Scrooge Sharp says it all. That's us. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And we'll catch you guys again soon.